Hi, my name's Harry. I'm a retired Australian Federal Police Officer and over 23 years experience in investigations and law enforcement. I believe that all governments and police are not following the Constitution of Australia Act 1901 or the Biosecurity Act 2015 and other legislation that is consistent with the Constitution and are acting unlawfully and need to start following the rule of law. And this is my story.
Welcome to Fair Go, your favourite podcast about building a better tomorrow. A podcast by the people, for the people, where we share small business stories from the business owners themselves. When you encounter unfair obstacles that are too hard to overcome on your own, remember, you don't have to do it alone. Together we can rebuild our great Southland and make Australia proud again. Join us today at fairbusinessaustralia.com.au. Welcome to Fair Go, a podcast by the people, for the people. It is the 20th of January at recording this video, and we have many questions, very intense questions coming to us about what is going on with our police force right now. And I put the word out mainly to the ether saying I really needed to talk with someone who knows their stuff. And as Providence would have it, as God has it, they presented themselves. So Harry was a federal police officer for over 20 years and has been very gracious to come on the show today. Harry, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me and allowing the opportunity.
So why don't you briefly talk us through why are you so qualified to even be talking about the questions that I'm about to be talking about you with? Tell us a little bit about your background, what makes you so qualified, and why can we trust what you've got to say today?
I joined, went to school like everyone did, joined the Australian Federal Police in 82 and predominantly I was in uniform for a short time, and mainly I was in Sydney. Was most of my service enforcing Commonwealth law, which we actually had to work across state borders and things like that. So we basically worked under Commonwealth legislation and the Constitution of Australia Act. So I'm very conversant in the laws and how they operate and how to implement them, and what procedures and practices, which also meant customs, border. We did medical fraud. It was importation of drugs. I mean, people know there's drugs at a state level, but then there's importation of drugs, which we dealt with mainly. There's also the medical fraud, because Medicare is a fraud. There's also Centrelink fraud. So we mainly did all the high profile, all the big cases. There was also obviously with 9/11 terrorism, so there was those issues as well. And basically, my background's my training was in intelligence. So that's looking at information and coming up with what was happening, hypothesis. Also as an investigator, also as a detective, which is an investigator. And also the other thing I did obviously was my predominant expertise was in covert operations and long-term protracted operations, where obviously you have to act lawfully and within the limits of the Constitution and your statutes. So that's basically it. And about 2005, 2006, I think I served my Queen and country long enough. I did when I joined in 82. And then I've also had several businesses and run several businesses. So wow. I've been an employee, and I've also been an employer. So I understand the dynamics. And I understand what's involved in running a business.
Wow.
And the laws apply. So, and my last business was in the accommodation hospitality industry, which was hit very hard.
Yes.
With what's been going on over the last 2 years nearly. I believe it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and here we are 2 years later. And that's basically my background.
I love it. So, folks, we have absolute gold here. We have a federal police officer of 20 years that has worked in multiple government departments, is very well versed in legislation and in covert and overt operations, and has then also, for the last, almost 20 years, been a small business owner. So we have someone that understands both sides of the coin now. I know people are going to be desperate to get these questions answered. So I'm just going to dive right in. We have seen recently what happened with Barwunda, that the police turned up to the place of business but couldn't get in because there were too many people there. And so they went away, came back at 1 o'clock in the morning and arrested Mark and Fiona and took them off to the watch house. We then saw recently Pierre from the Vintage Apron, who was invoking his right with the trespassing signs, and the police then arrived and forcibly removed him from his store. Centre management have now put an eviction notice on his store, and the question that keeps coming to me is now, if trespassing is such a why is trespassing not a silver bullet? Because we thought it was, and we're seeing business owners not being protected by trespassing. So could you explain to the audience, what is the purpose of trespassing notices? How are they designed to work, and why are they not working right now?
Well, the basic principle is, your home is your castle, or if you're a business owner, you're leasing even a rental property. Even if you don't own, you're leasing it. The owner, by virtue of a lease, has, as long as you do what's stated in the lease, which is pay your rent and whatever, you've got occupancy or possession of that property for that time. Okay, and there's certain things that you can and cannot do, and the same with the owner. And if they want to do certain things, they have to follow a process, which is normally, you've got to go through the normal steps which are set out in the document, in the lease document. And the same with your personal property. If you can put a trespass sign, because you as the owner have the right to either include or exclude anyone you want to speak to, whatever, and for whatever reason. And I've noticed people have been using those trespass signs. That's correct. Now, the issue we've got is, and this is the problem, what we've got at the moment, we've got 25 million people, however many adults and operating. They've come through the education system, and they haven't been taught the Constitution or what their rights are and how to stand up, what the common law is. They don't understand that everyone says a uniformed police stops you, you've got to speak to them. That's not correct. Unless you're committing an offence. If the police want to stop and just speak to you, you've got the right to silence, unless you're committing a crime. If you're not committing a crime, you can't be forced. I know they've got that move on. That's all legislation, but under the Constitution, under the High Court, that's been tested, has proven that you've got by several justices, High Court judges, that have said you have got the right of silence, and you've also got the right not to incriminate yourself. So if they're arresting you just for the purpose to question you, that's unlawful. And even if they do, you don't have to answer any questions. You don't have to give any information. Now, what they're trying to do is actually get your name, get some sort of ID which they can use to then put whatever charges or whatever they want to put on you. Now, the trespasser signs are correct, but the problem is the police, the politicians, the bureaucrats, and unfortunately, it's got to the point over the last 2 years, we've got magistrate courts, we've got Supreme Courts, and now we've got the High Court in the case of Clive Palmer, who went to the High Court, just totally disregarding our constitutional rights. Now, that's the problem. The problem is we've got every level of government acting unlawfully. Now, that's my opinion, and it's my opinion based on reading the Constitution. And if people go to that Constitution, we've had nearly 2 years now, that front page says it's the people. We actually empower and put people in place to look after our rights and to govern under the Constitution. And that's where the problem, I think that's where the problem lies. And that's why there's so much confusion, debate, conjecture, because people think the police, they're lawfully. No, that's not correct. A constable of police is a peace officer. Now, the only difference between a constable of police and a citizen is that a constable of police is sworn in under the Crown, which should be the Queen of Australia. Sorry, Queen of England, but I believe under what they've done is they've brought in the Australia Act, the Commonwealth has, without a referendum, which in effect they've changed our constitution without a referendum, which cannot be done, but they've done it anyway. So technically, every piece of legislation that's come in before any parliament and brought in that way without a proclamation certificate is unlawful. They may have gone through the process, which people believe is a correct process, but it makes it all unlawful. And there's High Court judges, I think there's one case back in 75, I can go back and refer to it, where it refers to that into the Australia Act particularly. And I think that's what's happening. We've got Dan Andrews down in Victoria legislating this Emergency Powers Act. Now, they've got a Bill of Rights down there, and we saw Dan Andrews last year, or was it in 20, last year or in 20, saying that, no, you've got no human rights, which is not correct. So what we've basically got is the bureaucracy power drunk. They've gone crazy and they're just doing whatever they want for whatever reason, and there's no checks and balances. The Senate is the check and balance in the Commonwealth, and we've got senators like Rennick, Antic, and we've got Malcolm Roberts and a few others now speaking up, and that's what they should do, irrespective of what party you have. So we have got that coming in now, but they're only coming in from the basis we're 2 years in. We've got the data. It doesn't make sense why we're still doing what we're doing. So
Right.
that, I believe that should have happened a lot earlier, because the data was there very early on, even at the end of 20.
Absolutely. So let me just go back and recap. So just a nutshell, let me know that I've understood this correctly. According to your lease as a business owner, and the trespassing also works for rental tenancy.
Or for your own home, you can have a notice. They can make an appointment. Yeah, there's quite a few people. If people go onto the internet, there's a lot of people that talk about the common law and actually these trespass notices, because it's like there's a case law where a police turned up to someone's home to arrest. They had a warrant for the son for whatever offence, which is fair enough. They were searching. Now the father, the owner of the property, said, "Sorry, he's not here. Leave the property. You're trespassing." Now what he did was he pushed the police off, told them to move and start forcibly removing them, in like pushing them off, whatever he did. Now police didn't like it. They arrested him, solded him, charged him. Anyway, he went all the way to the High Court, and the High Court upheld that the police were there unlawfully. They were trespassing because they failed. Once they were told they were no longer welcome, they have to leave, and it's the same. Now, police in those cafes, they left because they've got no cause to go there other than health orders or regular, which not law. So what they did was they came back at 1 a.m. without a warrant. 1 a.m. is really even an unreasonable time. We're not talking about a terrorist or.
And this is Bar Wonder you're talking about now.
We're talking about an upstanding member of the community. He's got a business, he's known. He's had interactions with the police, so he's not a flight risk. So what they actually could have done was issued in New South Wales, it's called a court attendance notice. I'm not sure what it's called in Queensland, but it's a summons. They could actually just summons those people to court. So what they did obviously was done to create an effect and send a signal to other businesses. There are a lot of businesses standing up and exercising their lawful God-given rights, which they're allowed to do. And they're acting lawfully, as far as I'm concerned, under the Constitution. Now, the police, for whatever reason,
they're ignoring it, aren't they? They are ignoring it.
They're ignoring it. Now, there's two problems. We have a lot of police now that I've noticed are very young, very inexperienced. A lot of police now have left the force. There's a few that have resigned. And it's
Is that COVID related, Harry? Have they left because of COVID, or have they left because?
Well, a lot have left because of the mandates, because like a lot of nurses, paramedics, they're at the front line. So they talk, police and paramedics and nurses talk, police run into them, firemen. So they're all a community. So they all talk, and they know they're on the street. They're at the coalface, right? If you want to know what's going on, you got to go down on the street. And see what's happening and understand. None of these politicians, none of these bureaucrats, and I lay the blame with the police management and the hierarchy. Now they're actually getting orders from headquarters, which is the government, and they're giving orders which I know, and in my opinion, and I believe, based on the Constitution, all the orders are unlawful and unconstitutional and no basis in law. Right. But the problem we've got is we've got police turning up in uniform with a badge.
Yes.
Now, as you notice, the drug runners are running wild. Everything. I've noticed people are speeding. People have been lunatics on the road. I think people are getting angry and whatever with what's been going on. So I've noticed the community policing that normally happens seems to have fallen away, and we're concentrating on this the last 2 years of, and I think there was the commissioner in New South Wales said we're going to treat the virus as a criminal. So I don't know what that means, but
Wow.
like he's going to go out there and arrest every virus that he
Okay,
can
so
find, or everyone that's infected. So I don't
yeah,
know what that means. Yeah, but I know none of the New South Wales police were given an order that do what you've got to do, enforce these rules and orders, and we'll go light. So the police, New South Wales police, have got standards to enforce. They've got a code of conduct. So you can only use as much force as reasonably necessary. So it looks like the book's being thrown out in the name of keeping us safe, supposedly.
Yeah. So according to a 20-year veteran federal police officer that is well versed in legislation and the Constitution, going to Bar Wonder at 1 o'clock in the morning without a warrant was unlawful. Is that correct?
Well, going at 1 a.m. without even, I believe, I don't know if it could have changed, but unless they're a terrorist or there's some pressing reason that they're at risk of fleeing, leaving the country, or going on the run, I don't see why they needed to go at 1 a.m. If they went there, they could have quite easily issued on the day. It's just issued a court attendance notice or a summons. So yes. I think what we're seeing is and obviously because there's been prior history with police going there and having to walk away, it's gone to the point where they need to. I think it's a face-saving exercise. They need to show that you are breaking, but it's not breaking the law. Now the problem is a lot of people. What we need is, and I think we need people to stand up. It's not going to be easy, but we need people to stand up and enforce our rights. And there's an old saying, rights need to be exercised or you'll lose them. Now, if you don't use them, if you don't enforce them, you'll lose them. So we're at a pivotal point now that, this is just going to keep happening until people start pushing back. And I mean peaceful non-compliance. Act within and use their system against them. Now, when this gentleman goes to court, very simple. I haven't seen any barrister, any lawyer, even the Supreme Court cases that we've had with the mandate. I haven't seen anyone do discovery. Because before you even go to court, if saying you've committed an offence, they've got to prove that there's actually offence being committed. There's a very simple process that even before you get to court, that you can throw this out. There's numerous tactics, and I won't go into it here because I don't want to give too much away. But this is what solicitors should be doing, and I don't understand why the last 2 years a lot of lawyers. I think I do know why a lot of lawyers have been quiet and haven't really spoken out. Have gone against the narrative because a lot of the big corporations have got money, are funded or get business from the government, as do the media, as do the big businesses. I mean, we just saw last year that all the big corporations don't have to pay back the JobKeeper, but they'll go after the little guy. And I mean, what's that about? They'll give them something to help them out. They don't really need it. They should return it. But now big business is mandating everyone take an experimental medical procedure. So if you have a look at that, you say, well, actually, what's going on there? Then we had on the paper yesterday that the big fast supermarket chains are actually talking with each other last year to make sure there were no food shortages and whatever, which is not supposed to happen under the ACCC. They've got to be, it's collusion or whatever. So there's a lot of things happening. They're saying it's happening for that reason, but without it being looked at and investigated, was that the reason? I mean, we've got shortages again. So there's a lot of things happening, which you've got to ask yourself, why is it happening and doesn't make sense.
So let's go back to Pierre for a moment. Now that video was, it was quite an emotional video to watch. Those 3 female police officers, which a lot of people have taken the opinion that these 3 females, these young females, were being used as puppets essentially, and that they had no right to enter the store because the trespassing notice was up, that Pierre was not doing anything wrong, and they certainly had no right to manhandle him and actually assault other customers, which was not shown on the mainstream version, but other customers were assaulted whilst they were trying to bring assistance to Pierre. So the police officers attending that store when he's not committing a criminal offence, breaching what he has already put up to be trespassing, that is not okay. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, it's not okay. He can actually, there's no reason why they need to be there and do it if they wanted, because what was the end result? They ended up charging them with what? Breaking a health order. Is that what the end result was?
I'm still not sure.
Or
the eviction notice was COVID compliance, which I want to talk to that as well. Now, the eviction notice, which was put on his shop, and apparently the locks were changed, but that could be Chinese whispers. But you spoke about
That was from
contractual.
management. That was from management.
Correct. But you spoke about if you have a lease and you have
Yeah.
trespassing signs and all this different stuff, the only way to get you out of a lease is that if you're breaking the terms of the lease. Now, I
Right.
strongly doubt that Pierre had anything in his lease about COVID or mandates or anything like
That's
that.
correct.
So them evicting him, that's actually unlawful as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, what I'd be, if I was Pierre, I'd be looking at suing the police for trespass,
Yep.
assault,
Yep.
assault and unlawful arrest.
Yep.
And also I'd be looking at the management
Yep.
and obviously taking action for and damages for loss of business and whatever
Yes.
they've done, because as far as I know, the individual's corporation is not a biosecurity officer under the Biosecurity Act 2015. Now, the other problem I have with all these police going in there, the Biosecurity Act makes it very clear that if they believe you're infectious, there has to be an order out on you individually on naming you. Now what they're doing is they're running police in Victoria, all these public servants with limited training are running around and telling people you're breaking this rule, that rule, which is not law. But if there's no order on the individual, they've got no authority. And even if there was an order on the individual has the right to challenge that. And the easiest way to challenge that, you go to your doctor, he checks you over, says, mate, there's nothing wrong with you. No, right. I don't want to do a PCR test or a rat test, because the FDA. They've stopped using them at the end of last year, and that was 6 months ago. They gave that notice. So the test isn't fit for purpose, neither is the rat.
Wow.
So really, they cannot prove without a proper, thorough medical examination, doing bloods and whatever. And you can go there and say, look, I'm not infectious, game over. And that's the problem I have. And what they're doing is they're saying there's these orders and whatever, and they're just applying them blanket over everyone, which you cannot do. Now, I know they're coming in now to try and change the legislation, which is what they always do, to try and cover a group or whatever. But that's still not lawful. You can't have something. It's got to be specific, and the infection's got to be stated.
Yes.
Why they think you're infected. If you've got no symptom, and how do you know that he's infectious? Where'd you come about it? So there's so many things wrong procedurally. And the other problem, this is the other big issue I've got, is show me no politician, no health bureaucrat has showed us any evidence that what they say is infecting people and supposedly killing people is actually doing it. It's what trust us, trust the science. But we're talking about a court of law. And that's what I understand. It's very simple to go to court and knock this out of the park.
Yes.
Now the courts are going to try and the prosecutors are going to try and shut it down, even though it's gotten to the point where I think the courts, the prosecutors, and the government, they're supposed to be separation of powers, but they seem to be all acting in unison, which is not the way it's meant to be. It's supposed to be the separation between the court and the parliament. So that's what needs to happen. And I think why a lot of solicitors have been quiet and haven't done anything is because we've noticed in Victoria, one solicitor was struck off, and they've struck off another solicitor in New South Wales for taking class action. So we've got the solicitors who can actually, you can go to, which is not a cheap exercise to go and try and force your legal rights. And when you go and try and do that, you've got the body that's in cahoots with the government. If the solicitor tries to do that, well, they try and strike them off or make it difficult for them. So that might be one explanation. We've got doctors and nurses being silenced again by APRA, who do the licensing, and they're tied in. They're a corporation. So they're tied in again now. And this is the whole system is being controlled. Now, whether you believe it's for your good or not for your good, it's called, there's a thing called the conflict of interest. And I worked in an area where we're looking at corruption. Now, not only does there has to be a separation of powers and not be a conflict of interest, there needs to be not the appearance of a conflict of interest, because even the appearance of a conflict of interest could be deemed to be corrupt, be potentially corrupt conduct. So there's so many things wrong. We haven't got a Commonwealth corruption body, obviously. So look, there's so many things wrong with this, and we're just blindly going along listening to one health officer, one bureaucrat, when there's tens of thousands of doctors and scientists that don't concur. Yeah.
Right. So the people that are currently purchasing the police pack, which is not a silver bullet, and it's general legal information only, But the purpose of the police pack is to help people not to feel so anxious, to help people to not even have to have an interaction with the police, because the pack does the talking for them. But if the police ignore trespassing signs or unlawfully, what we believe to be unlawfully, arrest the business owner and slap a fine on them, they can then fall back like a pseudo insurance policy and use the money that has been raised by the police pack. We've currently raised around $70,000, which is amazing, and we're going to be moving to more.
Can I say one more thing? Like,
go on ahead.
Knowledge is power, and like I'm been a very private person. I don't use Facebook and Instagram. In the past, I just used it for my business. I never used it for anything personal, putting anything on there, because I know it's a double-edged sword, and I know what they're doing with the data, the metadata, and with the metaverse and where it's all heading, right, with control. So, but since 20, when it all started, I started speaking out because I saw what was happening. I read up on it and whatever, and these people write about these things. They've got think tanks and papers and what's going to happen. So once I saw it out, I started speaking out. And there's on my Facebook page, I've got a lot of lives, a lot of information where people can go, and knowledge is power. So if you haven't read the Constitution, go and read it. You can just bring it up on the internet, learn your rights, learn what you can get. That gives you knowledge, which gives you confidence, and then you can be at the same level with the police, rather than police being up here and you're down here, because they've got the gun, they've got the badge. And the issue we've got now is we haven't got criminals who are used to dealing with police and can handle themselves and street smart and whatever. We've got law-abiding citizens who are business owners. And I noticed that one of the cafes there, they did a coffee for Police Day, and they were supportive of. Is that Pierre that was supportive of the police?
I don't know. I didn't hear that.
It was one of it was posted. One I think Senator Rennick posted it. So in the past, he's been supportive of police, and they had an open day there and whatever. And he was a big supporter of police. And for them to do that, I believe a Queensland police officer wrote into the senator and said how disgusted he was with what the actual Queensland police did on that occasion. So people need to get on the same level, and by learning their rights and then speaking. And when I say peaceful non-compliance, is don't get aggressive. Don't just have a chat to them like you talk to your customer. Treat them as one of your customers and go through it all. Explain everything what's in your pack and say, look, I don't believe. You can go back. And as a constable of police, you've got discretion. Now, a lot of police, unfortunately, believe that what they're doing is lawful and legal. A lot of them have been there for a long time. Maybe they've been burnt out, and maybe they're fed up with dealing with all this. Because I believe the police aren't happy about enforcing all this either, because they'd rather be doing more what they're supposed to. They're fostering the community, keeping crime down, and there's a lot of other things they were doing. And unfortunately, what's happened now is that the police have been put in the middle between the bureaucracy and the public, and the police never meet in the sandwich. So they've been put in a very difficult position where they've got to follow orders. If they don't, they can be charged internally. And if they follow the law and people are going to start taking them to court, obviously there's consequences. They're going to get investigated. So it is a very difficult situation. So I feel for the current police. And like I always say, I've got no problem with the police as long as they're acting legally and lawfully. If you've got to arrest one, and as much force as is necessary, and tell them why you're arresting him, and you can do it, especially if there's a relationship there. And we've got all these people that are, they're all legitimate business people that probably have never been in trouble with the police. They probably haven't even got a speeding ticket or anything, maybe apart from a camera or whatever. So then all of a sudden, and I think that's where the anxiety is coming from, because normally they're not dealing with police,
right?
Because they're not criminals. Now they've been turned into pseudo criminals on the basis of some health orders, rules and regulations that are not law. And I think that's where a lot of people are having difficulty with it. And I think police are having difficulty with it as well. So we've got to sort of empathize. I think there's got to be empathy on both sides, but also you've got to stand your ground and hold your rights, what you believe. So, but before you can even do that, you've got to learn your rights, know what you can and can't do, and lawful. And if it comes to that, there's no easy road. Well, you've got to follow through. And if everyone starts doing that, I keep saying peaceful non-compliance. If everyone did this months ago or a year ago, whatever, we wouldn't be in this state, because there's not enough police, there's not enough prisons, not enough people to do all this. And if everyone started filing, whatever, the whole system would collapse, because the courts can't handle the volume now, let alone if people are actually taking action. And that's what we need to do. And a lot of people you can represent yourself. If you know what you're doing, you can do that. You can do it very easily at a minimal cost. and do it. You can do the discovery, which is subpoena documents, even before you get to court, and good chance that you can throw all this out. And I believe in Victoria, a lot of fines have been thrown out because they are unlawful. Look, and people don't know, only a court can actually issue a fine. So if you get fined for anything, you can actually take it to court and have your day in court. Yeah, it takes time out, whatever, but a lot of people just pay it and go because it's easier. But that's fine if you want to do that. And that's what has probably led us to this situation where everything's just slowly crept up to us, slowly have been taking away our rights.
Yes.
And in the name of safety or keeping us safe.
So talk to me briefly, because we are updating the police pack right now with more state-specific legislation. But as a federal police officer, could you speak to me briefly about the right to silence nationwide and the right to film the police nationwide? Regardless of what state you're in, do you have the right to silence them? Regardless of what state you're in, do you have the right to film the police in a public setting?
Yes, you do. Yes, and yes. You've got the right not to speak to police unless you're committing a crime. If police come up to you and say, have I committed a crime, or you don't have to give any name. You've got the right to silence. And even if they arrest you, you've still got your right to silence. There's nothing there. And there's quite a few cases, DPP versus Hamilton, that you don't have to stop and speak to police unless you're under arrest. And even if you're under arrest, you've still got the right to silence. They've got to read you the right. They've got to tell you, you've got the right to say, well, have I committed a crime? What's the crime? There's no crime. I'm free to go. You can say it 3 times. If they arrest you, they can't arrest you for the purpose of conducting an investigation. That's unlawful as well. Just if they can't just arrest you, if they've got a suspicion or reasonable grounds, if they've got a reason for, there's been a burglary. If you're running out of the bank with a gun and there's been shots, they got, I think that's the guy that's done it. Well, they can come up to you in the action of committing an offence. Well, police officer and a citizen, I think it's still under 352 of the Crimes Act 1900, which is the New South Wales legislation. People have got a power of arrest as an individual, right? And then you've got to hand them over as soon as practicable to the police officer, and then you're a witness, so you become part of that. So that's basically you've always got the right to silence. You don't have to ask you don't have to incriminate yourself, and that's been proven. There was a New South Wales Crime Commission court case where there's the National Crime Authority. I'm not sure what it's called now, and there's also the New South Wales Crime Commission. They've got like a star chamber where they can pull you in and ask you questions. If you don't answer them, you're committing an offence. But it's been proven that you don't have to answer them if it might incriminate you. So you've got that right to silence, right? You've got that right to silence. Yeah, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So no matter where you are in the nation, if the police stop you, and you say to them, am I being detained?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Have I committed an offence? Am I under arrest? No.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I free to go? Or no, am I free to go? I'm under arrest. And so, because what happens if you know your rights and you start talking, because a lot of it's bluff. A lot of people see police and start telling them everything because you're nervous. Yeah. That's a normal reaction because of the power. The power. If you study body language and it's the police are up here, you're down here. So the interaction. So people, as soon as I see the uniform, what's the first thing? The police car pulls you over. All of a sudden, so you're already in a state of low vibration state. They've got the power. They've got that. So, and people say, where have you got this? Even with the license, a lot of times they say, can you? You only have to produce your license. You don't have to give it to them. So a lot of people don't even know that, and that's all you've got to do. In Queensland, it's a bit different. They've got they can hold you to prove your identity. It's legislation again, which I don't agree with, but they can, if you don't give them your name and address. Technically, you're committing an offence under the legislation, but then again, that's legislation, which is not law. It's illegal as opposed to lawful, common law. And under the High Court has actually this court statute. Well, there's precedents there that it's that you don't have to talk to them. But what they've got legislation. They are charging people, and if you go along with it, whatever, and you pay the fine, obviously it stands. But if you challenge it, but then again, it's a process to challenge it. And a lot of people haven't got the time, haven't got the resources to challenge it. And that's the problem. And that's what we're sort of facing now. We're in a very fast-paced society. Yes. People are in debt. They've got a lot going on. The last 2 years, a lot of businesses are struggling.
Yes.
And I think what a lot of small
Yes.
businesses don't realise is that all these COVID rules that they've put in place, I don't know, with even New South Wales, and I don't know how you can make money, right? So they're opening up and they're trying to comply with these rules, which you can't make money anyway. Then on top
No,
of the government
exactly.
coming in and sacking and fining them and whatever. So if I stand back and look at it, and it's like the system's designed to make small businesses fail. Big businesses, have got a lot more money behind them. They haven't had to repay their JobKeeper. I don't know what's happened. They've got a lot more bargaining power with rentals in shopping centres with a big corporation. If you're Woolworths, whatever, with a landlord, so I'm sure they're getting a better deal than the small business. So they don't, and depending who you are, so I don't think they've been affected as badly as, because a lot of small business like Bunnings, liquor, all the big corporations seem to run churches, gyms, cafe, a lot of restaurants haven't been able to operate. So all small chains seem to had more erroneous conditions put on them than the mega corporations and big business. So I'm just thinking, if you look at it purely from that point of view, the way they're running it, and small businesses, I believe, and it's going to come to a head this year. There's a lot of small businesses hurting.
Yes.
And I think like the guy from CrossFit was,
Yes.
I think he explained it very well.
Yes.
Exactly what's happening. So no matter what you do, and
better to trade and then get an unlawful fine and
well,
use the police back and get represented if you don't want to represent yourself.
Yeah. And what people need to know, every person in Australia that is running a business, operating a business, or is in Parliament and telling people to go and get an experimental medical procedure mandating is actually, and it's experimental, it's provisional use, is actually under the Constitution and under the immunisation handbook, and High Court rulings have been there. They're actually breaking the law now,
without realising it, which is such a tragedy.
And they're going to be open to be sued for damages.
Exactly.
Adverse, because that's what the government's done. It's put it onto all the small business again. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is an absolute travesty.
Scott Morrison said we can't mandate a vaccine, but then he's telling everyone he's pushing it on the states. The states are doing it.
Yeah, just beyond belief. So I know there's just a few more questions that I want to walk through. The right to film. Do you have the right to film no matter where you are in the nation? Do you have the right to film the police?
Yes, you do. If it's in public, they've got webcams, they've got camcorders. So if it's in public, in actual fact, if you've got interaction with the police, you've got a business, I strongly suggest your CCTV is on and in your business and you've got audio. And I suggest you film it as well. Use that as evidence, full evidence. So you can use, because there's been a lot of court cases where police have said, have arrested people and said things have happened in a certain way. And there's one case I was just watching in Adelaide. The person they broke his leg, and he got 700,000 in damages. This is an individual that committed no offence, no crime. Luckily, there's CCTV in Arundel Mall in South Australia, and it's still ongoing. And there's still the costs and ongoing loss of super and work. He's lost 12% use of his leg.
Wow.
So these things do happen. So if you can, record it at all times, because unfortunately the police, and we've seen that now over the last 2 years, where police have been caught thinking they were off camera, but they're on camera talking about what charges they were going to add to the health orders, because health orders in health mean nothing. So they're talking about assault police resist arrest, and that's what they try and do. And unfortunately, a lot of people these days, not only police, but a lot of people, we've got doctors, nurses, politicians acting dishonorably and not and think, going and worried about their jobs or careers or their or whatever it is. They're worried about everything else but acting legally and lawfully. And that's the problem.
So there's just so much in this interview, and I'm just so thankful that we've been able to get you on camera. Thank you so much. I want to talk briefly to Mario. Anybody that's been following Fair Business Australia and Mario's journey for a while, for those who don't know, Mario is a restaurant owner of around 30 years. He's a passionate, fiery Italian. He's an absolute bull at a gate, and he will not back down. Now, what Mario has done, he has actually gone the route of serving police individually, not as a QPOL organisation, but the individual police officers' names. Now, our police pack doesn't actually have that assertive approach. It has more of we have a reasonable excuse as to why we're trading, and these are all the reasonable excuses, and hopefully the police just leave them alone. But the fact that we're seeing that some police officers are not using discretion, and some police officers are choosing to ignore trespassing signs and behave unlawfully, some business owners may want to take this more assertive approach of taking the names and the badge numbers and serving the police personally. Have you ever heard about that? And what do you think? Is that a good way to go? Do you think that he will remain successful? Because to date, he hasn't had another visit from the police and he hasn't received a fine. And in his own words, I received a text from him today, business is booming. And he wants to come back on and share what's happening with his story. But from a federal police officer's point of view, what do you think about personally serving the police, not QPOL, the individual police officers?
I think that's a good idea, because the police, when they come to you, whatever they're the ones acting. They're solely responsible for their acts and omissions. So whatever happens, at the end of the day, if they do the wrong thing, they're liable. So whether the state will back them up, if they're sued. But and I believe that's what they've been trying to do with Daniel Andrews. They've served, and they had a court case that was well documented. They've been trying that, but unfortunately, with the politicians and that, the courts aren't acting in the interests of the people. Unfortunately, politics. Yeah. So but I think that's a good. I've heard of it, and I've heard about commercial liens and serving all the politicians with what's been going. There's a lot of talk that we've got the International Criminal Court. There's an action going on now, and I believe it's named several politicians and health ministers and chief medical officers, including some from Australia. Wow. So there are things going on. There is a case going on in England, I believe, about the mandates with the experimental medical procedure and with the adverse effects with what's been going on and the data, so that it's actually criminal now because of so many adverse events to do with it, and states are still pushing on. So I think that's what we need to do, because then I think what that does, then it makes the individual personally liable. It may mean that the state still comes to the party, but then obviously police have got powers of discretion. They can look at their act, and also if they're acting under the State Health Act, they've got to go back, and it refers to, it's got to be consistent with the Biosecurity Act, and it says that there's got to be an order, and they've got to go back. And I've seen footage of police that when questioned, "Oh, what have I done?" Don't even know. Said, "Oh, under the health orders." That's all they're saying. I mean, that's just not acceptable. I mean, there's a big gap. There's a knowledge gap there in our police. If you're going out and speaking to people and you're enforcing legislation, you need to know if it's masks or whatever, or the orders. You need to know what those orders are, and you need to know them verbatim. So otherwise, all you're doing is wasting your time, the public's time, and taxpayer money, because you're potentially pursuing instances that there's no offence, or there's people acting lawfully, or there's no issue. So that's the problem I have with it. I think we've got a lot of knowledge gap, and I think that's incumbent on the police. That's their responsibility, and also, they've got to use discretion, and that's what they're not doing. And I think unfortunately with New South Wales Police and obviously Victoria, they've used these fines, because you notice they keep increasing the fines. They keep doubling down, to keep saying that you've got to do this, you've got to do this, and with all the protests and the pushback they've had. And I think that's the problem, that, I think there's knowledge gap, and that's why I say to everyone, I keep, get the information, learn your rights, especially the last 2 years we've been in lockdown. Even if you spend an hour a day, maybe 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening, and just come up to speed with what your rights are, and you'll be amazed as to how little you know and how much you have. And once you know what you can do certain things, because what happens then, people start ringing lawyers, and unfortunately a lot of lawyers don't know this either. They're acting in the corporate system and the courts. People don't even know that a magistrate's court, a magistrate, we should have two magistrates sitting in that court. It's not a common. It's a kangaroo court, because you've got one person making a decision on your future as to whether you've done this or that. So really, under the Constitution, you need a jury of your peers, or you need 2 judges up there. You need 2 magistrates.
Wow.
That way, yeah. So people don't even know the basics.
Wow.
We travel all this. The border's 12 miles out of Australia. It's not. These are political borders. We're free to travel, and we can't even have. Under the Constitution, there cannot be a law that's more restrictive in one state or territory than another one. So,
wow.
Yeah, so everything's been, and look, I blame Scott Morrison for this really, because as the Prime Minister, head of the Commonwealth Parliament, he's leading, and he should be. This National Cabinet should be adhering to the Constitution, and he keeps saying, "I can't do this," but when it's in his interests, he can send people. You can cancel visas and send them back when it doesn't fit the narrative. So it's very obvious that they have got powers, and the Prime Minister, should be making sure that all states follow the Constitution, act lawfully. And there's a lot of ways he can do that. There's GST, withholding medical. There's money that the Commonwealth distributes to the states. So there's many ways that it can be done. It can be done, by agreement or with by a carrot or a stick, as I keep saying. So there's a lot of things wrong with what's going on, and I think what we need to do with a federal election coming up in May, I think what we need to do, I keep saying, is if you want the same thing to continue, because I think you've asked one of the questions you said, when do you think these mandates will end, is when everyone said we've had enough. It all ends when we just say no and stand up. Now, if you want this to end, and you vote Labor, Liberal, Greens, or National Party, you're going to keep getting this the same. They're not keeping you safe. No. They're not telling you the truth. They're lying to you. They're lying in front of you, and they're laughing at you. They're even telling you now, the Chief Health Officer in New South Wales is actually telling you how many are dying and what they're dying of, and in the hospital. So they're not keeping you safe. All the information's out now. So what I suggest, if people want change, real change, put in people, vote independents that are we need grassroots campaigns of people in the area that will vote the people's interests as it is in the Constitution, and then we can affect change. And the Senate needs to be a house of review, and we need to unwind all this unlawful legislation that's been put. And now we've got digital ID and everything else. It's just gone from one end. We've got discrimination. We've got the governments are telling people to discriminate against people whether they've got a disability or on medical grounds or whatever, which has never been the case.
No.
It didn't matter whether you had a flu shot or not to get into a shop. Or to go and see the football or whatever. I mean, the whole thing just doesn't make sense. The government's telling businesses to break every law, and there's businesses that are now being sued. There's cases. I've got 2 cases in at the moment where I've been discriminated against, and they're big corporations. I wouldn't do it to a small business owner. I'd speak to them and try and form, but I'm only doing it. I mean, I've got better things to do, but I'm only doing not for the money or anything, but just to take a stand, because they're breaking the law. They've, privacy issue and also a discrimination issue. They can't do that, Well,
you've got to take it to a precedent, don't you? Because all these fines getting thrown out of court is helpful in the short term, not in the long term, because it's going to happen again. History teaches us that if you don't set precedents and you don't push back sufficiently, then it happens all again. And so we have to push back now to win precedents, so that for the next generation, they don't have to go through what we've just gone through for the last 2 years. Well,
that's right. Like since the mid-70s, what's happened is it's been a slow erosion through legislation which has been enacted in Parliament, which has not followed the Constitution, which has got us to where we are now, that basically, I mean, they're even as of October last year, I don't know if people know, your title, your land title is now electronic, right? So your land title is no longer the piece of paper you had. I believe even a solicitor now can, if you authorise them, can transfer your deed or title electronically. So, I mean, how many solicitors? I mean, there's a history of solicitors going into trust accounts or acting fraudulently. So, and how many hacks have there been and whatever? So, how secure are your titles? And if they say, well, sorry, that according to our New South Wales land titles, you don't own that property. You did until this date, but how do you? So there's all these other. How do you prove it? We're going into this metaverse school learning via what we're doing now, which is good in some ways, but we're still human. We still need to interact. So there's all these issues. We need to unwind all that. It hasn't happened overnight. It's happened because she'll be right, mate. The old she'll be right, mate, whatever, sat back. And I know everyone complains about politicians, they're this and that. And
Yeah.
never do anything about it. And
Yes.
a few good friends of mine have said, oh, I knew the politicians were bad, but I never realised how bad they really were and how bad it is.
Yes.
And I think the good thing is that a lot of people, it's been a real eye-opener to how much evil and corruption is out there. And that's what we're seeing manifesting now. Like they've come out into the open. Just got to look at the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset, and you've got to look at everything that they're doing through the UN. And now Albanese's got a plan for net zero 2050. Well, mate, I'm worried about 21, 22, not 2050. And I mean, carbon, I mean, does he not know that carbon is an essential element of life? So he wants to get rid of carbon. I don't think he's read that paper very well. So I don't know who his advisors are, but I mean, you've got people like that who've been in politics for how many years?
Yeah, in a bubble. They're in a bubble.
Well, they're just regurgitating the talking points.
Yeah.
I don't think he's even read the document. I'll be very surprised. I've got so many advisors. So they're just the front men, you know. If you're out there spruiking now, like, you know, I've got this member for here. We want solutions. We want action today. Not next week, not next year, the year after. We need to unwind this. So what I can say to everyone is learn your rights, just go in and vote and get rid of the Labor, Liberal, Green Party. Okay, the Greens, if you look on their website, one world government. Okay, they're funded, you know, and they want us living in a cave with candles, you know, and I don't know how the rest of society is going to work. But that's what we've got to do. And we've got to do it. Look, no one's going to save us. We've got to do it ourselves.
Yes, we have to stand up ourselves.
Together, game over. That's what they fear. We've got to come together with the sovereigns too, the originals, because anyone born here is a sovereign. This goes very deep into common law and into even the Constitution. And once you realise the fraud and what the governments have done over the years, it's quite mind-blowing. But people just need to find out what's happening. And we need to all come together, left and right and whatever, and just come together peacefully and fix it. We can fix it. We've got all the resources here, and they've been stolen.
So good. Oh, it has been an absolute pleasure, Harry, having you on the show today. You've just given so much, and I know that people will be like those bobble toys on the bonnets of the car, just nodding, yes, 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 yes. And I think it's so wonderful for people to be able to hear from someone who is talking the talk, who has also walked the walk. And so what better mouth to be speaking the information that we all know deep down, you know, there's something just not right here. There's something just not right here. Well, actually, it's because it's not right. And here's it from the federal police officer himself. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. Hopefully we'll get you back on in a few months' time as the election starts to heat up and we see where we're going to be going with that.
Yeah, I don't know, is it right? There's a police site that one of the
police,
Cops for COVID Truth.
Yeah,
if you want to go on there and have a look, there's
absolutely.
And they're in Victoria. They're everywhere now. WA, even Queensland. There's a lot of good police out there, and a few have resigned so they could speak out. Because if you're in there, you can't speak out because you're subject to disciplinary action, obviously, because you can't go. You know, that's part of what you sign up for. Yeah. So there's a lot of information out there, and all I can say to people, police aren't your enemy; it's the government and the bureaucrats, and they're using the police. Go home, they take the unit. They're one of us. Yeah. So speak to them respectfully and ask them that they do the same with you and talk through it. And if you explain to them, look, this is, and it's all in your pack. But if you explain this is this, have you looked at this? Or I suggest and come back. We can have a discussion. But I'm going to fight this. What you're doing is unlawful. Unless you've got an order on me, which I can then refute and go through a process, there's nothing you can do. I'm put the signs up, which I'm happy. People won't come if they, all the signs are here. But it's a breach of privacy. It's not my job to police anything, so it's up to them. If you've got, that's fine. And that's it. If you have a discussion with them, if they want to come in, you're happy to discuss it, but not when they act in the manner they do. And if they do, obviously, you've just got to stand your ground and take the relevant action. And I think if a few people do it and we get some runs on the board, that'll just change the narrative. And I think it's already changing now. We've got the election coming. Yeah. And people just got, and this is what they've done. They will ease off as part of the plan that they've pushed as far as they can.
Yes.
We've had we've had a few million on the streets now.
Yes.
One weekend. So they've pushed us as far as they can. So they're going to back off now, and we've got the election coming, but we've got to keep pushing through and follow through with that election. And then we've got to do the same at a state level.
Yes.
And do the same thing at a state level and get our country back, get people in there that actually care about the country and the people. And will act honourably and not to big big interests, mega corporations that are running, the media, the pharmaceutical company, the mining interests and everything else, because we've got all resources, but they're plundering them all, they're taking them all, but the country's not getting any benefit. It's the, and our debt's through the roof, but we can fix that. Anything's fixable. We just got to do it all together.
We rebuild, we win, we vote.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So good. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Harry, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. And I will speak with you soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for that.
Have you got an inspiring story to tell? Register your business now for your chance to be featured on our Fair Go podcast. Ready to lend a helping hand? That's great. You can chip in through the website. Remember, 100% profit goes directly back into local small business. Together, we can rebuild this great Southland for ourselves and the next generation. Go to fairbusinessaustralia.com.au.